Someone asked me quite recently, I've heard what you've said, but I don't quite get it, what you mean by false consciousness. Well, it's tricky stuff, and it requires the use of that wonderful brain that we each and all have to put together things that we normally are accustomed, in the habit of separating. For instance, I imagine that very few people who have not had the privilege and the burden, dare I say, of seeking to understand these kind of relationships, nevertheless, is actually viewing the world through the principle of non-duality, which is the foundation of Eastern wisdom. That Eastern wisdom that a westernized Enlightenment project in Europe is being re-energized, but of course re-energized in the later time in which the basis was first worked out throughout the length and breadth of those justifications for which the Indian caste system itself was made concrete as the living experience of successive billions of Indian peoples. The difficulty they have, of course, is similar to the difficulty we have in Western civilization, which is that just as the audience I think I am addressing has become accustomed to the everyday habits of non-duality, those in the Far East became accustomed equally to the habits of non-duality in the Far East. This meant, of course, that there was a four-tiered system in the Far East, at which, at the very top of it, was the Brahmin priest class. The next stage down, or the next level down, was the warrior class. And these two layers put their heads together in a conspiracy, I do call it a conspiracy, by which to subordinate, enslave, reduce to servitude the next two levels of the Indian caste system. The merchant class, what we in the West would call the entrepreneur, and below that the artisan class, those who worked with their hands or who worked in the fields as skilled farming individuals. But beneath that four levels are the unspeakable group called the untouchables. Thus, if you exercise your imagination for a little and try to imagine what it was like to believe indeed that the Indian caste system had been ordained by God for the best services of all concerned, then you will get some idea of what I mean by false consciousness. There is a mystical basis to Eastern civilization, but do not be fooled. There is also a mystical basis to Western civilization. And it persuades us in the West that those in the East were living in a mystical, false consciousness, failing to see fully that we too are living in a mystical, false consciousness. A false consciousness that says the world is made up of an infinite collection of isolated parts and particles. For the moment, let us just call them atoms. Individuals in westernized society, westernized in Western civilization, are atomized individuals. They are separated each from the other by the belief that the individual is responsible for her own destiny. This is the basis, ultimately, of liberalism. Liberalism, however, is in its extension the most pernicious of all mystical bases. It projects into reality through the medium of its priests and scholars a false consciousness of the world as if it were viewed from outside of the world, when in fact I think I have already encouraged you to believe that we are actually inside of the world, and that the non-duality, the mystical non-duality of the Far East can now be recognized in the Western term of dialectic.
Open your eyes, look up to the skies and see.